Welcome to the Midnight Lore channel, a place where stories, legends, and the mysteries of our world are explored slowly, carefully, and in a way designed to help you relax, study, game, or drift into sleep. If you're returning, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, I'm glad you found your way to the channel. Tonight's video continues our journey through the darker corners of folklore. Not the jump scare kind of horror, but the quiet kind, the type that has lived in whispered stories, in cultural memory, and in the landscapes people call home. This video is meant to be experienced at your own pace. You can simply listen while you unwind, let it play in the background while you work or explore a game world, or allow it to keep you company as you fall asleep. Our focus tonight is on a figure said to move through the deserts, mesas, and long stretches of open land in the American Southwest, a being woven into Navajo belief, often spoken about only in caution and only when necessary, a presence associated with witchcraft, transformation, and the unsettling feeling that something familiar is watching from the shadows, even when the night seems still. But before we begin, it's important to set the intention for this video. This is not a sensationalized retelling, and it is not meant to claim authority over a living spiritual tradition. Skinwalkers are part of Navajo culture, and much of what has been shared publicly only scratches the surface of a belief that is not mine to define. This video approaches the subject from the perspective of publicly available lore, historical accounts, and stories that have spread far beyond their origins. It is meant to explore how the legend has been understood, interpreted, and echoed in modern storytelling, while acknowledging the deep cultural weight it carries. If you choose to listen closely, you'll notice the themes of this legend reveal themselves slowly, shifting like the desert wind, moving between history, belief, and the edges of the unknown. If you are here simply to rest, the steady pace of the narration will carry you along, without demanding your attention. The goal is not to frighten you, but to immerse you in a long atmospheric journey through one of the most enduring and misunderstood figures in folklore. So settle in, find a comfortable position, dim the lights if you'd like, and let your mind move at its own pace. We're about to explore a legend shaped by silence, secrecy, and stories that linger long after they've been told. This is the Midnight Lore channel, and tonight we begin with the tale of the Skinwalker. Chapter 1. The Land of the Diné. To understand the stories we're about to explore, we first need to understand the land where they were born, a place shaped by open horizons, by red earth and stone, and by a silence that seems to hold its own memory. This is the homeland of the Navajo people, who call themselves the Diné. Their territory stretches across the vastness of the American Southwest, into Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. It is a landscape of mesas rising from the desert floor, long canyons carved by time, and wide stretches of sagebrush and sand that seem untouched by anything but wind. When you stand in this region, whether in the quiet desert heat or the cold glow of a moonlit night, you understand how stories here grow from the land itself. For the Diné, the landscape is not just scenery, it is a living presence, deeply connected to identity, harmony, and the rhythm of daily life. In Navajo belief, a central concept is hojo, a word often translated as balance, peace, beauty, or harmony. But the English translations only capture a small part of its meaning. Hojo is a way of living in alignment with the world, acknowledging that everything has a place, a responsibility, and a relationship to everything else. It is a state where mind, spirit, community, and nature exist together in wholeness. Stories play a vital role in teaching and maintaining this harmony. They help explain how the world was created, why certain taboos exist, and how a person should move through life. Some stories offer comfort or wisdom. Others serve as guidance or warning, reminders of what happens when balance is broken. As with many cultures, the Diné have narratives that speak of beings who protect, heal, and guide. But there are also stories of those who disrupt, harm, or intentionally walk the path away from harmony. These tales acknowledge that imbalance exists, and that choosing the wrong path can lead to dangerous consequences. Among these darker paths lies the tradition of witchcraft, something distinct from Western ideas of magic or sorcery. Here, witchcraft represents an inversion of everything a healer or medicine person stands for. It is a deliberate choice to reject harmony in favor of power gained through harmful acts. This worldview frames the Skinwalker not as a creature of the wilderness, but as a person who has turned away from the values of the community, choosing secrecy, corruption, and fear. Understanding this setting, the land, its people, and the guiding principles of balance and harmony is essential. Without it, the Skinwalker becomes just another monster story, reduced to the kind of horror found in movies or on message boards. But with this context, the legend becomes something deeper, a reflection of cultural values, of the importance of living rightly, and of the ever-present tension between harmony and imbalance. As we move forward, keep this land in mind. Picture the desert stretching to the horizon, the distant silhouettes of mountains, the quiet of nighttime winds across open spaces. Because the stories that follow do not exist apart from this place. They grow from it, move through it, and return to it, just as the Diné themselves always have. In this landscape, the boundary between the natural and the supernatural feels thin, and it is here, in the stillness of the Southwest, that the legend of the Skinwalker begins. Chapter 2. Witchery and the Path Away from Harmony. To understand what a Skinwalker truly represents, we need to look at the broader framework it belongs to. A system of beliefs centered around healing, balance, and the difficult truth that some people choose to walk in the opposite direction. In Navajo culture, those who work with spiritual forces are commonly divided into two paths. The first is the path of the medicine person, someone who performs ceremonies, restores harmony, and brings healing to individuals in the community. These individuals spend years learning chants, rituals, and teachings that are passed down carefully from generation to generation. Their purpose is to guide people back into Hozo, that state of balance, where the mind, spirit, and world align. The second path is far darker. It is the path of the witch, one who takes the same knowledge of ceremonies and spiritual forces, but twists them for harm. This is incomparable to the popular idea of witches in movies or fantasy stories. It is not seen as a neutral practice, nor an alternate form of magic. In Navajo belief, witchcraft is an intentional violation of sacred laws. It is the rejection of harmony in favor of selfish power, fear, and control. Within these beliefs, the term witch doesn't describe someone born different. It describes someone who has made a choice to abandon the values of the community and to embrace acts that disrupt, weaken, or destroy. In many stories, this shift is not subtle. It begins with the breaking of strict prohibitions, acts that society considers deeply immoral or spiritually corrupting. Once these taboos are embraced, the person is no longer seen as walking the same world as everyone else. They have stepped into a different role entirely. There are different forms of witchcraft described in traditional teachings. Some focus on spreading illness, Others are said to manipulate spirits, interfere with ceremonies, or create curses that bring misfortune. But among all these types, the one most widely spoken about beyond the Navajo community, and the one that has taken root in popular imagination, is the shape-shifting witch known as the Skinwalker. It is important to stress that Skinwalkers are not considered creatures born from myth. They are understood as human beings who have turned their spiritual knowledge toward destructive ends. This distinction matters because it reveals how the legend functions within Navajo culture. It is not simply a frightening story told around a fire. It is a reminder of what happens when a person knowingly steps away from harmony, breaks sacred laws, and uses spiritual knowledge for harm rather than healing. In many ways, the Skinwalker represents the embodiment of imbalance. Where medicine people work to repair, Skinwalkers are believed to unmake. Where healers guide others toward peace, a Skinwalker chooses secrecy, deception, and malice. Their existence in stories reflects the belief that power can be used in two directions, and that wisdom alone does not guarantee goodness. This duality, healer and witch, harmony and imbalance, is central to understanding everything that follows. Without it, the Skinwalker becomes a simple monster, stripped of the cultural meaning that gives it shape. But through this lens, the legend becomes a statement about human choices, about spiritual responsibility, and about the consequences of misused power. As we move deeper into the lore, keep this contrast in mind. On one side stands the medicine person, maintaining balance. On the other stands the witch, disrupting it. And from this fractured relationship between what heals and what harms, the figure of the Skinwalker emerges, born not from myth, but from the shadowed potential that exists within human beings themselves. In the next chapter, we'll step fully into that shadow and explore what a Skinwalker is believed to be, their abilities, their nature, and the unsettling traits that have made them one of the most whispered about beings in the American Southwest. Chapter 3. What is a Skinwalker? Now that we've explored the land and the belief system from which this legend emerges, we can step closer to the figure at the center of tonight's story, the Skinwalker, a being whose presence in folklore is unsettling, not because it is monstrous, but because it is human, someone who has deliberately chosen to abandon harmony for the sake of power. The word most people know is Skinwalker, but this term is a broad English label. Within Navajo culture, the being is more specifically referred to as Yi Naldlushi, often translated as, with it, he goes on all fours, or by means of it, she goes on all fours. It is a description, not a name, and like many descriptions in traditional stories, it points toward behavior rather than identity, a reminder that these beings are believed to walk in forms that are not their own. At its core, a Skinwalker is understood to be a witch, someone who has mastered spiritual and ceremonial knowledge, but who uses that knowledge in violation of sacred laws. Unlike many creatures in global folklore, Skinwalkers are not depicted as supernatural species or distant mythical beings. They are people who have crossed a boundary that should never be crossed, and in doing so, have transformed themselves into something dangerous. One of the traits most often associated with Skinwalkers is the ability to change shape. Stories describe them taking on the forms of animals familiar to the Southwest: coyotes, wolves, foxes, owls, or even large twisted versions of these creatures. In some accounts, the transformation appears seamless. In others, there is always something slightly wrong. An animal that moves too quickly, eyes that reflect with an unnatural color, or limbs that bend in ways no creature's body should allow. But shape-shifting is only one aspect of the law. Skinwalkers are also said to possess knowledge that allows them to manipulate the senses. Some stories describe them mimicking voices, calling out to people using the tone and cadence of a loved one, a friend, or even the listener themselves. Others describe encounters where a skinwalker seems to anticipate thoughts, track movements, or appear and disappear with unsettling ease. These abilities are not presented as magical in the fantasy sense, but as an extension of the spiritual power gained through acts that break sacred taboos. Physical presence is another recurring theme. A skinwalker in animal form may appear larger than expected, heavier, or strangely humanoid. Witnesses often describe the unsettling feeling that the animal's face resembles a distorted human one, or that its gaze carries a level of intelligence that feels out of place. In some stories, the creature moves in abrupt, unnatural bursts, faster than any known animal, while in others, it lingers almost motionless, watching from a distance before vanishing the moment someone looks away. The law also speaks of an aura of illness or misfortune. A skinwalker's presence is often described as spiritually corrosive, leaving people drained, anxious, or unwell after an encounter. This idea reflects the deeper belief that the being is tied to imbalance, that their actions, intentions, and very existence disrupt the harmony that medicine people work so hard to maintain. Another important aspect is secrecy. Skinwalkers, according to traditional stories, do not reveal themselves openly unless they intend harm. They operate in the shadows, moving through remote areas, abandoned structures, or stretches of land where the night is allowed to settle without interruption. This secrecy contributes to the fear surrounding them, not only because their abilities are frightening, but because their identity is hidden. A skinwalker could be anyone, someone known, someone trusted, someone who has chosen a path completely unknown to those around them. And underlying all of this is a cultural boundary. Talking too openly about skinwalkers is traditionally avoided. Stories are shared only when necessary, and often only with people who understand the gravity of the subject. This reluctance adds another layer to the legend. Silence becomes part of the story, an acknowledgement that even words have power, and that naming something can sometimes invite its attention. When viewed through this lens, a skinwalker becomes more than a terrifying figure. It becomes a reflection of spiritual imbalance, human choice, and the danger of misused knowledge. It occupies the space between the physical and the spiritual, the familiar and the distorted, the human and the lost. With this understanding in place, we can now explore how someone becomes a skinwalker, according to the stories that have been shared. Because the transformation is not random, it is earned through actions that break the deepest taboos, actions that change not only how a person is seen, but who they are believed to be. In the next chapter, we'll examine these stories more closely and explore the difficult and unsettling steps said to lead someone down the path from person to skinwalker. Chapter 4. Becoming a skinwalker. In many stories, a skinwalker is not simply a person who wakes up one day changed. The transformation is a process, gradual, deliberate, and marked by decisions that move someone further and further away from harmony. It is a path defined not by accident, but by intention. Across various public retellings and accounts, one element appears again and again. To become a skinwalker, a person must commit an act that violates the deepest moral and spiritual laws of their community. This may be described as taking the life of a family member, or breaking another sacred bond so severe that it severs the individual from the guiding principles of Hojo, from balance, unity, and the interconnectedness of life. This idea is not meant to sensationalize. Rather, it reflects the belief that certain choices are so profoundly destructive that they fundamentally change a person's relationship with the world. After such an act, the individual is said to be spiritually altered, no longer walking the same path as others. They have crossed a line from which there is no return. Once this boundary is crossed, the stories describe a period of training and initiation. A person is believed to seek out others who have already turned toward witchcraft, learning from them in secrecy. This training is not merely the learning of rituals, but the deliberate inversion of teachings meant for healing. Where a medicine person memorizes chants used to restore harmony, a witch learns how to disrupt it. Where a healer studies ceremonies that bring protection or peace, a witch is said to study the means by which suffering can be created. Through this inversion, the person adopts a new relationship with spiritual forces. Knowledge once meant for balance is twisted into something corrosive. Rituals meant to honor become rituals meant to dominate. It is this corruption of knowledge, combined with the earlier breaking of sacred laws, that opens the path to becoming a skinwalker. In many public accounts, shape-shifting is described as the most recognizable ability, but it is important to understand the symbolism behind it. Taking on an animal form represents a departure from human identity. It is a casting off of the self, a shedding of the person one once was. Some stories describe skinwalkers wearing the hides of animals, while others portray the transformation as more supernatural. An ability gained through years of harmful practice and spiritual distortion. Regardless of the specific details, these stories agree on one point. A skinwalker's power does not come from nature or from the animals they imitate. It comes from the choices they have made, choices that pull them further from humanity and deeper into imbalance. This loss of humanity is central to the law. In traditional accounts, the transformation is as much spiritual as physical. A skinwalker is often described as hollow in some way, emotionally or morally disconnected, as if the actions they have taken have carved away the parts of themselves that once felt compassion, guilt, or kinship. Their identity becomes tied to secrecy, to power gained through fear, and to a life lived in the margins of society. The transformation also carries practical consequences. A skinwalker must remain hidden. They move at night, avoid attention, and protect their identity at all costs. Some stories say that revealing their human name can strip them of their power or expose them to danger. Others suggest that a skinwalker living among ordinary people appears withdrawn, unpredictable, or strangely detached, never fully present, yet always watchful. In this way, becoming a skinwalker is not simply about gaining abilities. It is about losing something fundamental, a connection to community, a place within the balance of the world, a sense of belonging among the living. What remains is a figure shaped by secrecy, fear, and the pursuit of power through destruction, rather than healing. Understanding this path is essential, because it reframes the skinwalker not as a creature to be hunted or defeated, but as a reflection of what happens when a person chooses to walk away from everything that holds a culture together. It is a story about the consequences of imbalance, a warning, a boundary, and a reminder of the fragility of harmony. In the next chapter, we'll explore the abilities, signs, and limits associated with skinwalkers, the traits that define them in stories, and the reasons these descriptions have persisted and evolved over time. Chapter 5. Forms, Signs, and Weaknesses. When people speak of skinwalkers outside Navajo culture, the focus often turns quickly to the physical traits, the strange movements, the twisted shapes, the sightings of animals that don't behave as animals should. But within the broader lore, these details are part of something deeper. They are reflections of imbalance made visible, hints that the person behind the transformation has stepped far outside the harmony that guides the rest of the community. Many accounts describe the Skinwalker's ability to take on the form of an animal. These animals are not chosen at random. They are usually creatures associated with the night or with survival in harsh landscapes. Coyotes, wolves, foxes, owls, or large, powerful birds. In their natural state, these animals are respected, even admired. But when a Skinwalker assumes their shape, something about them becomes distorted. They may appear too large or too thin, moving with a strange rhythm that doesn't match the animal's natural behavior. Some are described as unnaturally fast, crossing great distances in moments. Others are silent when they should make noise, or loud when the night ought to be still. One of the most unsettling details found in many stories is the way a Skinwalker's form seems caught between human and animal. Witnesses often describe features that don't quite match. A coyote with shoulders shaped like a person's, or a wolf whose face seems disturbingly human when seen up close. In some accounts, the eyes are the most revealing trait. They shine with an intelligence that doesn't belong to the creature being imitated, or they reflect light in a color that feels unnatural, even threatening. Movement is another clue often mentioned. Skinwalkers are said to run on all fours with impossible speed, covering terrain far quicker than any known human or animal. At other times, they stand upright, their posture stiff or uneven, as if the body they wear is fighting against the shape it's being forced into. These descriptions paint a picture of beings caught between forms, never fully human, never fully animal, and always unsettling to witness. Beyond physical appearance, stories often mention sensory signs that accompany a Skinwalker's presence. A sudden chill in the air, even on warm nights. A feeling of dread that settles without explanation. Or a smell, described variously as decay, wet fur, or something sweet and rotten, that lingers near places where they've been seen. In many of these accounts, the environment reacts before the Skinwalker reveals itself, as if the world recognizes the imbalance before the human eye does. Another recurring theme is mimicry. Skinwalkers are said to imitate voices, but never perfectly. They may call out using the sound of a friend or family member, or even echo the listener's own voice from a distance. The imitation often sounds hollow, slightly distorted, or too calm for the situation. This mimicry is not portrayed as a playful trick, but as a lure, a way of drawing someone closer, or away from safety, or into confusion. There are also stories describing their ability to track individuals across long distances. Some suggest that once a Skinwalker sets its attention on someone, it can follow them for miles without tiring. Others claim they appear at windows, doorways, or on lonely roads, watching silently before disappearing again. In these accounts, the most frightening element is not the creature itself, but the consistency. The idea that someone could be followed for nights before ever understanding what's happening. As for weaknesses, the lore here becomes more complicated. Because traditional beliefs avoid discussing Skinwalkers directly, especially in instructional detail, most public information is fragmentary or heavily influenced by outside interpretation. Some stories suggest that identifying a Skinwalker by name strips them of their power, forcing them back into human form. Others describe protective practices involving ash or certain ceremonial materials, used not as weapons, but as spiritual barriers. In some tales, a skilled healer or knowledgeable community member may confront a Skinwalker through ceremony, restoring balance and diminishing the witch's power. It's important to recognize that many of these described weaknesses come from varying sources, some traditional, some modern, and some blended through retellings. In Navajo culture, the emphasis is less on defeating a skinwalker physically and more on countering the imbalance they create. The focus is on restoring harmony, not hunting or destroying. This reflects the broader worldview from which the stories emerge. A belief that spiritual problems require spiritual solutions and that healing is always more important than conflict. What these traits collectively show is a being defined not just by shape-shifting, but by disturbance. A skinwalker is recognized not only through what it looks like or how it moves, but through the way the world seems to shift in its presence. The silence of the night, the unease in the air, the subtle distortions that signal something is out of place. With these signs and abilities in mind, the figure of the skinwalker becomes clearer, a being that operates in shadows, transforms through harmful acts, and carries with it the sense that something once human has become twisted by its own choices. In the next chapter, we'll look beyond Navajo lands and examine how surrounding tribes and cultures have their own stories of shapeshifters and witchcraft. Figures often grouped together with skinwalkers, but with unique identities and meanings that deserve their own space. Chapter 6: Skinwalkers and Neighboring Traditions. As the stories of skinwalkers spread beyond the Navajo Nation, they often became entangled with other indigenous legends, stories from neighboring tribes who also speak of witches, shapeshifters, or beings that move between forms. But while these stories sometimes appear similar on the surface, each tradition carries its own meaning, its own history, and its own relationship to the land and the people who tell it. Across the Southwest, many indigenous cultures have long histories of stories involving transformation. Some speak of medicine people who could take animal forms for healing, hunting, or ceremonial purposes. Others describe witches or harmful figures who use transformations for darker reasons. To outside listeners, these distinctions can blur together. But within each community, the differences are clear and significant. Among the Pueblo peoples, for example, there are stories of witches who take on animal shapes, particularly owls or other nocturnal creatures. These beings are often associated with bad omens or harmful magic, but they are rooted in Pueblo beliefs and ceremonies, not the Navajo witchery tradition. Their purpose within the culture may overlap thematically, but the details, how they transform, why they transform, and what they represent, are unique. The Hopi also have their own stories of witches and sorcerers capable of transformation. Some Hopi tales speak of beings who can disguise themselves as animals or even as other people. But again, the meaning is different. In Hopi belief, these figures fit into a larger symbolic system involving order, disorder, and the struggle between maintaining tradition and succumbing to harmful influences. These stories are not interchangeable with Navajo ones, even though they share the broader theme of shapeshifting. Among the Apache, there are accounts of beings sometimes described as witches or nightwalkers, individuals who use spiritual knowledge for harm. Apache narratives often include figures who can take the form of animals or move silently through the wilderness at impossible speeds. To an outsider, these descriptions may sound very much like what is told about skinwalkers, but they come from their own cultural context, shaped by Apache relationships with the land, community, and spirituality. What becomes clear when examining these traditions side by side is that shapeshifting on its own is not what defines a skinwalker. Transformation appears in many cultures, and not always as something evil. In some tribes, transformation is a sacred gift, a sign of spiritual authority or tool for ceremonial practice. In others, it is a warning, a sign that someone has stepped outside the moral boundaries of the community. The meaning shifts depending on where the story is told and who is telling it. The confusion often arises because, as these stories spread into mainstream culture, they become condensed. Different beings, different traditions, and different purposes are merged into one simplified archetype, a mysterious creature in the woods or desert that mimics voices or appears in animal form. This blending is understandable from the outside, but it loses the cultural depth and nuance that give each story its purpose. For the Navajo, the Skinwalker is rooted deeply in a specific worldview, one centered around harmony, balance, and the dangers of breaking sacred laws. For neighboring tribes, their shapeshifters and witches carry meanings shaped by entirely different histories and ceremonial practices. These beings may share surface similarities, but they are not the same, and treating them as interchangeable diminishes the cultures from which they originate. It's also important to recognize that, historically, indigenous groups had their own relationships with one another. Alliances, conflicts, shared borders, and shifting territories. Stories did travel between cultures, but they evolved as they moved, adopting new meanings and interpretations. A story told by the Navajo might be echoed differently by the Apache. A Hopi tale might find parallels in Pueblo traditions, but remain distinct in symbolism. Each culture shaped its stories according to its needs, whether to teach, to warn, or to preserve balance within the community. The modern internet age has accelerated this blending. Skinwalkers, wendigos, shapeshifters, ghosts, and generic forest creatures often get folded into a single category of online horror. This category is designed for entertainment rather than cultural accuracy. Online stories rarely distinguish between Navajo teachings and, for example, Plains folklore or Pacific Northwest legends. The result is a hybrid myth, an amalgamation that captures imagination but obscures the specific beliefs of the individual tribes. Understanding these differences doesn't weaken the legend of the Skinwalker, it strengthens it. It allows us to see the figure more clearly, without the distortion that comes from blending unrelated traditions. It also highlights the depth of indigenous storytelling, reminding us that each culture has its own worldview, its own structure, and its own understanding of transformation, power, and danger. As we return our focus to Navajo lore, this broader perspective helps us see the Skinwalker for what it truly represents. Not a universal shapeshifter, not a general creature of the Southwest, but a figure rooted in a specific cultural and spiritual framework, one that carries profound meaning within the community that tells its stories. In the next chapter, we take a step from the world of belief into the world of reported experience. We'll look at historical accounts, old stories, and encounters that people claim to have witnessed. Moments when the line between legend and lived experience becomes thin enough to unsettle even the most skeptical listener. Chapter 7. Historical and alleged real-world encounters. For as long as the stories of skinwalkers have existed, there have been people who claim to have seen something they could not explain, something that moved through the night in a way no animal should, or appeared along lonely stretches of land with an unnerving sense of intent. These accounts are difficult to verify, and within Navajo culture, such experiences are not shared lightly. But over time, certain stories have drifted into the public eye, forming a patchwork of sightings and encounters that echo the deeper themes of the legend. Many of the earliest accounts are simple, brief and unsettling in their simplicity. Sheepherders working at dusk reported seeing large coyotes watching from ridge lines, too still, too silent, and positioned in ways that seemed oddly deliberate. Cowboys moving cattle across long desert ranges described encountering wolves that did not run like wolves, or coyotes whose eyes caught the firelight with an intelligence that made them step back and watch more carefully. These stories rarely ended in dramatic confrontation. Rather, they lingered in memory because something about the moment felt fundamentally wrong, as if the witness had stepped briefly into a space where they were being watched not by an animal, but by a presence evaluating them in return. Other accounts come from travelers who ventured along reservation roads late at night. These roads stretch for miles across open desert, with only distant silhouettes of mesas or scattered houses breaking the horizon. Drivers have described seeing figures on the side of the road, sometimes human, sometimes animal, and sometimes shifting between the two in the quick, disorienting glance of headlights. In a number of stories, drivers report slowing down, only to feel a sudden wave of unease that urges them to speed up again. When they glance in the rearview mirror, the figure is either gone or still standing there facing the road as though nothing had changed. One of the most frequently repeated types of encounters involves livestock. Farmers and ranchers have long spoken of animals found injured or behaving strangely after nights marked by unusual activity. Dogs barking at nothing, horses refusing to approach certain areas, or sheep scattered and panicked without any sign of a natural predator. Some describe finding tracks that start as hoofprints or paw prints and then change shape, as though something walking on four legs had suddenly stood upright. In other cases, the tracks simply disappear, as if whatever made them decided to leave the ground entirely. On the Navajo Nation, there are long-standing stories passed down quietly through families, stories of glimpsing figures draped in animal hides moving quickly across distant hillsides, or hearing knocks at windows in the early hours of the morning followed by a voice calling a family member's name. These accounts are rarely shared outside the community, and those who tell them often do so with hesitation. The purpose is not to frighten, but to acknowledge that certain events have no comfortable explanation. Some of the more detailed historical encounters describe direct confrontations, though these are less common. There are stories of ranch hands firing at large wolf-like creatures only for the bullets to have no visible effect. In other accounts, a strange animal is hit or injured, only for a human to be found later with an identical wound, as though the form they were wearing had failed them for a moment. These details appear in many retellings, though their accuracy is impossible to confirm. Still, the consistency of the pattern, animal form, human vulnerability, reflects the deeper belief that skinwalkers are not monsters, but people who have taken on a dangerous role. Homes, too, appear in these stories. Families describe nights when scratching sounds echo along the outside walls, circling the house slowly as if mapping its edges. Sometimes a face is seen in a window, human-like but distorted, or animal-like with features that seem too aware. Other times, the only evidence is the feeling of being observed, followed by a sudden shift in the atmosphere of the home, as though something had passed by and chosen not to enter. There are also accounts shared by law enforcement officers patrolling remote areas. Some speak of responding to calls about strange figures lurking near homes, only to arrive and find tracks leading off into desert darkness. Others recall seeing large animals cross the road in front of them, running faster than seemed physically possible, disappearing into terrain where no tracks should vanish so quickly. Not all of these encounters are dramatic. Some are just moments fleeting, unexplained, and quietly unsettling. A pair of glowing eyes watching from the edge of a field. A figure moving through sagebrush, with a speed that doesn't match its size. A voice calling from outside a tent when everyone in the group is accounted for. A coyote standing in the middle of the road, unmoving, long after an ordinary animal would have fled. What ties these stories together is not certainty, but atmosphere, a sense of being observed by something that stands just outside the boundaries of normal experience, something that feels familiar enough to be recognized, yet wrong enough to be feared. In many cases, the fear comes not from what is seen, but from the implications, the idea that someone, somewhere, might be watching through borrowed eyes. While skeptics may dismiss these encounters as misidentifications, tricks of light, or the result of isolation in vast landscapes, the stories persist. They persist because they resonate with deeper cultural fears, because they echo long-standing teachings, and because in regions where the night is wide and uninterrupted, imagination and intuition have room to move. These historical and alleged encounters form a bridge between folklore and personal experience. They show how the legend continues to live, not only in stories told in daylight, but in moments of quiet unease that settle over the land when the desert grows still. In the next chapter, we'll step into one of the most famous locations associated with Skinwalker lore, a ranch in northeastern Utah that has become a focal point for modern myths, scientific curiosity, and paranormal speculation. Chapter 8, Skinwalker Ranch, a modern myth hub. As stories of skinwalkers and other strange beings filtered into the wider world, most remain tied to specific families, specific places, and moments shared quietly within indigenous communities. But in northeastern Utah, one patch of land began attracting attention far beyond the region. Attention from journalists, researchers, television producers, government contractors, and countless people fascinated by the unexplained. Today, it is known almost universally as Skinwalker Ranch, a name that has become synonymous with modern paranormal folklore. The ranch sits in the Winter Basin, a region of rolling hills, plateaus, and remote stretches of land where small communities exist alongside vast open spaces. The area has a long history, with the indigenous peoples who once lived across the region, including the Ute tribe. Some Ute oral traditions describe certain parts of the basin as dangerous or spiritually charged, places where caution was necessary. It is from these stories, and from later interpretations, that the ranch eventually inherited its evocative name. The property first entered wider public awareness through the accounts of the Sherman family, who purchased the ranch in the 1990s. They expected a quiet rural life focused on raising cattle, but their time there became defined by a series of experiences they struggled to explain. Their stories, later documented in articles and books, described events that went beyond typical ranch frustrations. One of the most well-known incidents involved a large wolf that approached the family shortly after they moved in. At first, the animal seemed calm, almost tame, but when it suddenly lunged at a calf, the family reacted quickly, firing at it multiple times at close range. According to their account, the bullets seemed to have no effect. When the wolf finally retreated, they attempted to follow its tracks, only to find that they simply stopped as if the creature had vanished into thin air. This moment became one of the earliest stories fueling speculation about the ranch. Over time, the Shermans reported seeing strange lights in the sky, hearing unexplained sounds, and encountering animals behaving in unusual ways. They described cattle mutilations that did not resemble the work of predators, as well as shadowy figures seen moving through fields at night. The combination of these events, natural, unnatural, and ambiguous, created an atmosphere of unease that eventually pushed the family to leave the ranch. In the late 1990s, the property was purchased by a research organization funded by businessman Robert Bigelow. This group, often shrouded in secrecy, conducted years of investigation into the reports associated with the ranch. Their research touched on a wide variety of phenomena: unidentified flying objects, strange electromagnetic readings, unusual animal behavior, and sightings of tall humanoid figures seen at the edges of the property. While the group did release some findings, much of their work remained confidential, fueling speculation and adding another layer to the ranch's mystique. In the years that followed, the ranch changed hands again and became the subject of television series and documentaries, most notably The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch and Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. These productions brought renewed attention to the property, blending scientific investigation with dramatic retellings and on-site exploration. The shows document a wide range of unexplained events: glowing orbs, malfunctioning equipment, bursts of radiation, and sightings that resemble both traditional folklore and modern paranormal interpretation. But the connection between the ranch and the Skinwalker legend is more complex than it may appear in modern media. While the ranch lies within a region that includes Ute and Navajo history, the term Skinwalker became attached to the property largely through outsider interpretation and the blending of regional stories. In traditional Navajo belief, skinwalkers are tied to specific cultural teachings and should not be conflated with every unexplained event in the Southwest. Yet over time, as paranormal reports accumulated at the ranch, the public began associating all strange occurrences in the area with skinwalkers, regardless of whether they fit the cultural framework of Navajo witchcraft. This merging of distinct phenomena created a modern mythos around the ranch, one that blends indigenous stories with UFO sightings, cryptid encounters, and scientific mysteries. The ranch now serves as a kind of crossroads for multiple belief systems, some grounded in culture, others rooted in modern speculation, and many shaped by television narratives. This blending is part of what makes Skinwalker Ranch so compelling to the public, but it also complicates efforts to understand the specific origins of each story. The ranch's popularity reflects a broader human fascination, the desire to find places where the ordinary rules of nature seem to bend, places where ancient beliefs and modern technology intersect, where centuries-old stories of shapeshifters meet contemporary tales of bright lights and mysterious forces. In the quiet of the Uinta Basin, the ranch stands as a symbol of this intersection, a location that invites both skepticism and wonder. Whether the events reported there have natural explanations, spiritual ones, or something in between is still debated. What is clear is that Skinwalker Ranch has become a focal point for exploring the unknown, a modern myth hub where folklore and contemporary curiosity blend into a single, evolving narrative. As we move forward, we'll leave the ranch behind and step into personal stories, modern anecdotes, and alleged encounters that people claim to have experienced firsthand. Stories told on forums, passed down through families, or shared by those who believe they came face to face with something they could not rationalize. These stories form the heart of the next chapter, where the boundary between legend and lived experience grows thinner still. Chapter 9. Voices in the Dark. Modern anecdotes and alleged encounters. Stories of skinwalkers have existed for generations, carried quietly through families and communities. But in recent years, the internet has become a place where people share experiences they can't explain. Encounters in forests, deserts, and remote stretches of land where the night grows deep and the edges of the familiar begin to blur. These modern accounts vary in detail, setting, and tone, yet they share a common thread. A moment when something feels wrong in a way that is difficult to articulate. What follows are a series of case files, stories retold from the patterns found in public anecdotes, shaped into cohesive narratives that mirror the unsettling calm of real encounters. Case File 1. The Mission Road Visitor. A volunteer working on a reservation in northern Arizona recalled walking the short trail between two small buildings just after sunset. The desert light had faded into a blue-gray haze, and the evening chill had begun to settle across the open land. As he walked, he noticed movement near the edge of the trail, a coyote watching from a cluster of sagebrush. At first, this didn't seem unusual. Coyotes are common in the area, often curious but wary of people. What unsettled him was the stillness. The animal didn't flinch, didn't lower its head, didn't move at all except to track him with its eyes. He continued walking, trying to brush off the feeling, until he heard a soft crunch of gravel behind him. When he turned, the coyote was gone. But further up the trail, farther than any animal should have been able to run in that brief moment, the same figure stood waiting on the path. Same posture, same unblinking stare. He later admitted he didn't run. He simply walked backward slowly and returned to the building he'd come from, locking the door as calmly as he could. When he looked outside a few minutes later, the trail was empty. Only silence remained. Case File 2. The Backwoods Mimic. A group of friends camping deep in a forested area of New Mexico reported something that remained with them for years. They chose a secluded site, one without nearby campsites or marked trails, so they could enjoy a quiet night away from town. As darkness settled in, the fire became their only source of light. One of the group stepped away from camp to gather more wood. A few minutes passed before the others heard his voice calling from the darkness. "Hey, can one of you bring a flashlight?" The tone was familiar, the inflection unmistakable. But when they called back, there was no response. Moments later, the real friend stepped out of the opposite direction, arms full of sticks, confused by their questions. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Before anyone could speak again, the voice came a second time, this time closer, but strained and uneven, as if someone were trying to imitate speech rather than naturally produce it. The woods around them felt suddenly too large, too quiet. They stayed close to the fire for the rest of the night, listening to the sound of leaves shifting in the darkness, hoping morning would come quickly. When it did, there were no footprints except their own. Case File 3. The Desert Stalker. A hunter traveling alone in Utah described an encounter he could not explain. He was used to the stillness of the desert, the way sound carries across open land, and how animals move through the brush. But one evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant cliffs, he felt a strange prickle at the base of his neck, a sense of being watched. At first, he heard only soft footsteps behind him. When he turned, he saw a figure moving between low shrubs. It looked like a large coyote, but its size was wrong, too tall, too broad across the shoulders. He began walking back toward his truck, expecting the animal to lose interest. Instead, it followed him, keeping just out of full view. When he stopped, it stopped. When he quickened his pace, it matched him. The moment that stayed with him occurred just before he reached the vehicle. The creature shifted its weight and rose slightly, as though trying to decide whether to stand upright. Its legs bent at an angle that seemed disturbingly human. He reached his truck, climbed inside, and locked the doors. By the time he mustered the courage to look out the window, the creature had vanished into the desert dusk. Case File 4. The knock at the window. A family living in a rural part of New Mexico reported a series of events that occurred over several nights. They lived far from neighboring houses, with only a long dirt driveway connecting their home to the main road. One night, just after midnight, a soft knock sounded at their bedroom window. The mother assumed it was a tree branch brushing the glass, but when she looked outside, she saw a shape standing in the yard, too far to make out clearly, but tall and motionless. She woke her husband, but by the time he looked, the figure was gone. The next night, the knocking returned, this time accompanied by a voice calling the husband's name in a quiet, almost gentle tone. The family had no visitors, no neighbors close enough for a prank. When they checked the yard the next morning, they found tracks circling the house, but the prints were inconsistent, starting as something like a dog's and ending in shapes more like bare human feet. They didn't sleep for several nights after that, waiting for the sounds to return. They never did, but the family moved a few months later. Case File 5. The roadside figure. A young man driving a remote stretch of highway late at night recounted seeing a person standing on the shoulder of the road. It was unusual to see anyone out there. No houses, no rest stops, just miles of open desert. He slowed slightly as he approached, thinking the figure might need help. But as his headlights illuminated the person more clearly, he felt a wave of panic. The figure's posture was wrong, bent forward, arms hanging too low, as if the joints were placed in ways they shouldn't be. Its head turned sharply toward the car, and for a moment, he thought he saw eyes that reflected back an amber color. He pressed the accelerator and drove on, watching the rear-view mirror as the figure receded into darkness. Just before it vanished, it dropped to all fours and moved in a way no person could, covering several yards in a single fluid motion before disappearing from the edge of the road. Case File 6. The Grandmother's Warning. Not all stories come from direct encounters. Some come from memories, warnings passed down through families who have lived near these lands for generations. One man recalled staying with his grandmother on the reservation during summers. She never spoke directly of skinwalkers, but she taught him rules that carried the weight of experience. Never whistle at night. Never call out into the darkness. Never investigate voices calling your name. And always close the curtains once the sun goes down. He remembered one evening when he forgot that last rule. Just after nightfall, he heard something brush against the window. When he moved to close the curtain, he caught a glimpse of something standing just beyond the porch light, an animal shape with a human-like outline. Before he could look closely, it stepped backward into darkness, dissolving into the night. His grandmother said only one thing afterward: "Some things see us when we can't see them." Case File 7. The House That Wouldn't Stay Quiet. A group of cousins staying in a small house on tribal land described a night when they heard someone walking around the property. Slow, heavy footsteps that paused beneath windows, then resumed again. When they looked outside, they saw nothing. But each time they moved to a different room, the footsteps followed. At one point, something scraped against the door, followed by a long, steady exhale, as if someone or something was standing just on the other side, waiting. When morning came, they found a set of prints in the dirt leading away from the house. They began as paw prints, shifted into something larger and more elongated, and then stopped abruptly in the middle of an open field. These stories differ in setting and detail, but they share a quiet unease, a sense that something watched, listened, or moved just beyond the boundary of explanation. Whether these encounters were misinterpretations, natural events, or genuine brushes with something stranger, they endure because of the emotions they evoke: fear, curiosity, a feeling of being small in a wide, mysterious landscape where not everything can be neatly understood. In the next chapter, we'll take a step back from storytelling and explore the natural, psychological, and cultural explanations that may lie beneath these experiences, revealing why the legend continues to thrive in both ancient tradition and modern imagination. Chapter 10: Explanations, Fear, Psychology, and the Night. After hearing so many stories, some ancient, some modern, it's natural to wonder what lies beneath them. Are these encounters signs of something spiritual? Are they misunderstandings of the natural world? Or do they reflect something deeper within the human mind, shaped by culture, environment, and the quiet vulnerability we feel when alone in the dark? The answer may not fit neatly into one explanation. Instead, it lies somewhere between the land, the senses, and the stories we carry with us. To begin, it helps to remember that the human mind is finely tuned for survival. Our ancestors relied on senses that alert us to danger: shadows that move, sudden silence, eyes glimpsed in the brush. In remote environments like the deserts and forests of the Southwest, these instincts become even sharper. The land is vast, the nights are quiet, and the boundary between safety and vulnerability can feel thin. In such places, natural elements can easily shift into something uncanny. Coyotes and wolves behave differently at night, their movements quick and unpredictable. Owls can mimic sounds that resemble human voices. The desert plays tricks with distance and direction. Sound travels far, bouncing off rock formations and creating the illusion of movement where none exists. A single animal call can seem to come from multiple sources, confusing even experienced travelers. Then there is the way shadows behave. Under moonlight, an ordinary animal can appear enormous. When headlights catch an animal at just the wrong angle, its eyes may reflect with eerie intensity. A branch brushing against a window, a shifting breeze, or the crunch of gravel beneath hooves can all take on new meaning when filtered through exhaustion, isolation, or the quiet tension of an unfamiliar night. But physical explanations alone cannot account for the persistence of these stories. There is also the psychological element, the way fear sharpens attention and fills in the unknown with possibilities drawn from memory, culture, and imagination. When someone has grown up hearing warnings or teachings about beings that move through the night, those stories shape how they interpret unexplained moments. If a family has passed down rules, don't whistle after dark, don't follow strange voices, don't open the door when someone calls from outside, then the unexpected sound at a window becomes more than a sound. It becomes a spark for old teachings, a reminder of what might be lurking just beyond sight. Even those unfamiliar with the cultural context are not immune. Stories shared online, in television shows, and through conversations create a framework the mind can draw from. Late at night, in the quiet of an empty road or the stillness of a forest, the brain fills gaps quickly. It compares what it sees with what it knows, or what it fears it knows. Fatigue, stress, and darkness can also play significant roles. In survival psychology, it's well known that when the brain becomes overloaded or deprived of rest, it begins to misinterpret stimuli, shapes blur, sounds distort. Simple movements seem unnatural. The mind becomes more willing to assign meaning to ambiguity, especially when alone or feeling watched. Yet these explanations do not invalidate the emotional truth of the encounters people describe. Fear felt in the moment is real, even if caused by natural events. Unease that lingers for years speaks to something deeper, something that taps into the universal human experience of facing the unknown. There is also a third layer, one that blends belief and experience in a way that cannot be easily separated: the spiritual worldview of the Navajo and other indigenous cultures. In those traditions, the existence of beings like skinwalkers is not approached with skepticism or the need for proof. It is part of a larger understanding of balance, harmony, and the consequences of actions that disrupt those principles. In this worldview, phenomena that outsiders might describe as psychological or environmental may be interpreted through a spiritual lens instead. Illness, misfortune, or eerie encounters can be signs of imbalance or harm caused by someone who has chosen a darker path. A skinwalker, in this sense, is not simply a shapeshifter. It is a symbol of imbalance made manifest, a presence that reflects a break in the natural order. This doesn't mean these interpretations conflict with scientific explanations. They exist alongside them. Where one person sees a strange animal, another may see a warning. Where one person hears a voice in the woods, another may hear evidence of something working against harmony. The interpretation depends on perspective, history, and the relationship one has with the land and its stories. What becomes clear then is that the endurance of skinwalker lore comes from a blend of forces: the psychology of fear, the vastness of the land, the influence of cultural memory, and the human tendency to seek meaning in the unknown. Whether the stories represent literal beings, spiritual warnings, or misunderstood natural events, they reveal how deeply the night affects us, how much mystery still lives in the spaces where light fades and imagination takes hold. In the next chapter, we'll explore the ways these stories have been shaped, altered, and sometimes distorted by modern culture, examining what happens when a sacred tradition meets the internet, popular media, and the growing appetite for sensationalized folklore. Chapter 11: Culture Clash and the Shifting Shape of a Legend. As Skinwalker stories have moved beyond the Navajo Nation and into wider public awareness, they have taken on new forms, shaped not only by tradition, but by the influence of the internet, entertainment media, and the growing global fascination with mystery and horror. This evolution has widened the legend's reach, but it has also created tension between cultural understanding and popular interpretation. Traditionally, skinwalkers are discussed with caution. They are not casual storytelling subjects or creatures meant to entertain. They occupy a place of seriousness within Navajo belief, connected to concepts of imbalance, broken taboos, and the misuse of spiritual knowledge. Stories about them are shared carefully, often only when necessary, and almost always within a context of cultural understanding. But once the word skinwalker entered mainstream media, the boundaries around these stories began to shift. Movies, television shows, and online discussions started blending the skinwalker with unrelated figures from other mythologies, turning it into a catch-all creature associated with rural fear, nighttime forests, and the unknown. To many people outside indigenous communities, a skinwalker became just another monster in the growing catalogue of horror icons, a figure to be chased, hunted, dramatized, or turned into viral content. This transformation reflects a larger pattern. When a story leaves the culture that shaped it, its meaning often changes. Elements that hold spiritual or ceremonial weight can easily become exaggerated, altered, or stripped of context to fit the expectations of entertainment. Details that were once symbolic may be taken literally, while those meant to teach or warn may be turned into spectacle. The rise of internet culture accelerated this shift dramatically. Online forums, short-form videos, creepypasta stories, and social media trends all played a role in reshaping the Skinwalker into something more generic. An eerie figure in the woods, a mimic calling from the darkness, or a creature glimpsed on a lonely road. While these elements echo parts of the original lore, they often mix in traits from cryptids, ghosts, and other shape-shifting beings from different cultures. In many ways, the modern internet Skinwalker is a hybrid creation, part folklore, part urban legend, part digital storytelling experiment. This blending is not inherently malicious, but it does create distance from the Navajo worldview that gave rise to the original stories. For many Diné people, this casual use of the term Skinwalker can feel uncomfortable or disrespectful. It takes something rooted in cultural and spiritual meaning and reframes it as a form of entertainment, stripping away the weight the concept holds within the community. Some indigenous voices have spoken out about this, not to scold or gatekeep, but to remind others that these stories are part of living belief systems, not just raw material for horror fiction. The concern is not that people are curious, but that the curiosity can overshadow the culture behind the story. When a sacred teaching becomes a meme or a trend, its deeper significance risks being lost entirely. There is also the issue of misrepresentation. Modern adaptations often portray skinwalkers as monstrous creatures roaming forests or preying on passers-by. Interpretations that ignore the central truth that, in traditional lore, a skinwalker is a human being who has made harmful choices, not a supernatural species. This shift changes the tone of the story dramatically. It moves the focus away from human actions, morality, and imbalance, and turns it into a simple monster narrative. As these portrayals spread, they can influence how outsiders talk about skinwalkers, sometimes reinforcing stereotypes about indigenous cultures or reducing them to sources of spooky material. This can happen even when people mean no harm, simply because the entertainment-driven version of the story overshadows the original context. Yet it's also true that stories evolve. They travel, they adapt, and they grow in ways no one can predict. Folklore is meant to be shaped by time and by the people who tell it. What matters is whether those who engage with these stories do so with awareness, recognizing that behind the modern meme or viral video lies a cultural belief that deserves respect. For your channel, and for any storyteller approaching this subject, this awareness becomes part of the narrative itself. By acknowledging the origins of the legend, the meaning it holds within Navajo culture, and the ways it has been transformed by modern media, you offer viewers a fuller, more grounded understanding. You avoid treating the legend as a simple horror trope, and instead explore its complexity, its spiritual weight, its moral dimension, and the intersections between traditional beliefs and modern imagination. In this way, the story is not diluted but enriched. It becomes not just a retelling of eerie encounters, but an examination of how stories travel across cultures, how meaning changes over time, and how the line between respect and appropriation must be navigated with care. As we move into the final chapter, we will reflect on what all of this means, what becomes of a legend once it leaves its home, and how belief, skepticism, and cultural understanding shape the way we interpret beings like the Skinwalker. And we'll return to the central question that has lingered throughout this journey. What does it mean to ask whether a Skinwalker is real? Chapter 12. Are Skinwalkers real? After exploring the land, the belief system, the stories, the encounters, and the modern interpretations, one question remains, perhaps the question that quietly guided this entire journey. Are Skinwalkers real? It's a simple question, but the answer is anything but simple. For many people outside Navajo culture, real often means physical, tangible, something that can be measured, photographed, or confirmed through evidence. From that perspective, the stories may appear to be folklore, symbols, teachings, or misunderstandings shaped by fear and unfamiliar environments. But for those who grew up within the cultural framework that gave rise to the Skinwalker, the question holds a different weight. In Navajo belief, the existence of witchcraft and harmful intentions is not metaphoric. It is part of a spiritual landscape as old as the people themselves. It is understood not through scientific proof, but through experience, tradition, and the recognition that imbalance, whether personal, communal, or spiritual, has consequences that are both seen and unseen. In this worldview, asking if a Skinwalker is real may be like asking if illness, misfortune, or harm caused by human choice is real. The answer is not measured in photographs or footprints, but in the impact these forces have on the community. A Skinwalker becomes real in the same way a warning is real, or a danger recognized through generations is real. Its truth exists in the space between the literal and the symbolic, the seen and the understood. For others, the reality may lie in the psychological realm. Fear, especially fear rooted in cultural memory or isolation, can create vivid experiences. The night can distort shapes and voices. Stress can heighten awareness until the familiar becomes strange. In these moments, the mind reaches for stories it knows, stories that explain the unexplainable. From this perspective, Skinwalkers are real because the fear feels real, because the uncertainty feels real, because the human mind is built to navigate the unknown by connecting it to narrative. And then there are those who see truth in the encounters themselves. People who have witnessed shapes moving too quickly, heard voices calling from impossible distances, or felt the unmistakable sense of being watched by something that is not entirely natural. Whether these moments were caused by animals, misinterpretations, exhaustion, or something beyond explanation, the experiences remain real to those who live them. They linger, unsettling and unresolved. Perhaps the most honest answer is that the reality of Skinwalkers depends on the viewpoint of the person asking. To some, they are figures from sacred stories, reminders of spiritual imbalance. To others, they are archetypes, expressions of fear, morality, or caution. And to still others, they are beings that inhabit the liminal spaces of the night, encountered in moments when the world feels thinner than usual. What the legend unquestionably reveals is something universal. We are deeply affected by what we do not understand, by what moves at the edge of our perception, by the possibility that the world still holds mysteries beyond our control. The Skinwalker endures not because everyone interprets it the same way, but because the legend speaks to something within all of us, the part that wonders what lies just beyond the firelight, what watches from the shadows, and what it means when someone chooses a path away from balance. Whether the Skinwalker is seen as a literal being, a spiritual danger, a cultural symbol, or a story shaped by the human mind, its influence remains powerful. It reminds us that the world is larger than our understanding, that belief and experience intertwine in complex ways, and that some stories persist because they describe not just creatures, but the human condition itself. As we bring this exploration to a close, imagine once more the vast landscapes of the Southwest. The mesas rising against a dimming sky, the desert stretching into silence, the thin line between day and night where stories begin to take shape. Somewhere in that space, between belief and uncertainty, between fear and understanding, the legend of the Skinwalker continues to walk beside us, quiet, mysterious, and enduring. And whether real or not, its presence in our stories reminds us that there are still questions the night has yet to answer. Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. From the deserts and mesas of the Southwest to the stories passed quietly through generations, we've explored a legend that continues to shape the way people think about the unknown. Whether approached as folklore, as cultural teaching, or as something more mysterious, the Skinwalker remains one of the most enduring figures in modern storytelling. If you've made it this far, I hope this video has brought you a sense of calm curiosity, something to settle your mind as you rest, study, or simply enjoy the quiet hours of the night. The Midnight Lore channel is a place for exactly that, a space where stories can unfold slowly, without hurry, and where the mysteries of the world can be explored with respect and care. If you'd like to hear more legends, myths, and long-form narratives like this, feel free to stay a while. There will always be another story to tell, another thread of lore to follow, and another journey waiting in the dark. For now, I'll leave you with a simple thought. The world is vast, filled with landscapes, histories, and beliefs far older than any of us. And sometimes, the act of listening, quietly, patiently, is the closest we come to understanding them. Thank you again for spending your time here. Rest well, focus deeply, or continue whatever peaceful path you're on. This is the Midnight Lore channel. Good night.